The fire of God. We've been talking about all the different things that from the Bible. We talked about God speaking to Moses from a burning bush. We talked about the fire of God's message in Jeremiah's bones. We've talked about the fire of Pentecost. We've talked about fanning the fire into flame. And today we're continuing. I'm finding more and more stories of fire in the Bible. And I promise I won't threaten you with fire again, literally. But I will eventually get to hellfire. And one of the things that I think is very true in today's world is we don't talk about hell enough. Because every soul is going to spend eternity in one of two places. And it's our job to take as many people as we can with us into heaven, and that's only through Jesus Christ. So my question to you today, is your faith fireproof? Daniel chapter 3 is where we're headed today. And I want to ask this question. What fire are you going through today? I'm convinced that all of us have our own fiery trials that we're in. And these three Hebrew children, these three young men from Jerusalem, had their fiery trial. But every one of us do as well. And we need to consider that this morning. And so I want you to turn to Daniel chapter 3. And it says 1 to 30. I'm going to skip a few verses because when you read through it, it repeats itself. And I'm not going to do that part. Daniel chapter 3, starting at verse 1. King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold, 60 cubits high and 6 cubits wide, and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. And then it talks about the rules that he put about this thing, and we'll learn more later. Jump down to verse 7. Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the nations and people of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "May the king live forever. Your majesty has issued a decree that everyone who hears the sound of the horn and the flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold. And that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, your majesty. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold that you've set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold that I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipe, and all kinds of music," and that's why I skipped those other verses. That whole list is in there over and over, and I can't say them. You are ready to fall down and worship the image I made. Very good. But if you don't worship, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand? Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to him, "King Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to deliver us from it, and he will deliver us from your majesty's hand. But even if he does not, we want you to know, your majesty, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude toward them changed. He ordered the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And these three men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked the others, "Weren't there three men that we threw into the tied up and threw into the fire?" And they replied, "Certainly, your majesty." He said, "Look, I see four men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed. And the fourth looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisors crowded around them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command, and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore, I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces, and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. Isn't that a fun story?
Yeah.
I like it. And as we get the setting of this story, we need to remember that the Babylonians had come to Israel and had conquered Jerusalem. And when they conquered Jerusalem, they went through and picked out the choice young men. By that they meant the ones that were the best looking, the ones that were the brightest, the ones that were the top of their class, and those are the ones that they took with them as prisoners back to Babylon. Included in those were Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And it's really interesting because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego don't show up there. And that's because Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are their Babylonian names. Now, these are their Hebrew names. These are the names that their godly parents gave them. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And Daniel was also given a new name in Babylon, Belteshazzar. But all through the book, he's not called Belteshazzar, he's called Daniel. But these other three, they got stuck with their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And that's kind of fun because those words, names kind of roll off your tongue. I remember my mom said the way to remember the names of the three Hebrew boys that were burned in the fire was shake the bed, make the bed, and to bed you go. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. Okay, so, but those are the names of these Hebrew boys that were taken, and they excelled in their training in Babylon. Remember when they got there, they said, "We don't want to defile ourselves and eat the food that you need to eat, want us to eat. We're going to stay with our Jewish kosher food." And so they did. And they said, "Well, what if you don't do well?" And they said, "Try us out." For 2 weeks they did, and they were better and healthier than anything else. So they stuck to that diet. They were the top of their class. Daniel and all those other three were all promoted to positions of leadership in Babylon. And they remained faithful to God even though they were in this foreign country with foreign gods and foreign theology all the way around them. Now Nebuchadnezzar made a statue, and this is quite the thing. It was made of gold. Now that in itself is pretty amazing, but it was 60 cubits high. You know what a cubit is? It's from your elbow to your fingertip. 18 inches is basically the equivalent of a cubit. So if you're 60 cubits high, that's 90 feet. That's the length of this church. And so if you took this church and stood it up, that's how tall this gold statue was that Nebuchadnezzar made there and put it up on the plain. And the people of Babylon were forced to bow down and worship it whenever the flones and the hoots, the horns and the flutes played. Whenever all this music came, they were supposed to bow down and worship this big old thing that was standing up in the plain. Anyone who disobeyed would be thrown into a blazing, fiery furnace. And the three boys didn't. But there is something about their disobedience that I think we as Christians today can really learn from. There was a respectful disobedience, if you will. They said, first Nebuchadnezzar, it says, was furious. His attitude changed toward them. And he says, okay, I'll give you one last chance. Bow down. If you bow down, you'll be okay. If you don't, it's the fire for you. And they said, King Nebuchadnezzar. So they acknowledged him as king. They didn't say, well, you idiot. There's only one God, and that's not it. And we're not going to bow down to that. We've told you that before. We're true to our God. Don't you get anything? They could have been they'd have been like me. They'd have been mouthy. And they would have said something that they shouldn't have, but they said, King, we aren't going to defend ourselves. We don't need to change our, tell you why we're doing what we do, because we will trust God. I know that you said we're going to die, you're going to throw us in the furnace. We're going to trust God. And he says, God is able to deliver us. And I asked you this morning, what fire you were going through? Our God is able to deliver you. I don't care what that fire is. He can get you through it. And that's what they said. Our God is able. And the problem that we have living in this world is there's a difference between what God is able to do and what he actually does at times. But they said, he will deliver us from your hand. Which was kind of a blatant statement, don't you think? We're going to trust God and he will deliver us from your hand. Now that was in response to his statement to them, okay, I'm going to throw you into the fire, and who's going to rescue you who is going to rescue you from my hand? And they turned around and said, we're going to trust God. He's able to deliver us, and he will rescue us from your hand. And they had that absolute confidence as they spoke to him, and they spoke to the king. And then they said this, the God we serve is able to deliver. Hang on to that. What a beautiful, strengthful, just a resource that we can have when we're going through tough times. But even if he does not, now this is where it gets tough. Because I'm going to trust God. He can take this cancer out of my body. He can answer our prayers and bring Howard back to full health again. And we trust it. And God, you can do that. But even if you don't, that is the sign of real faithfulness. And that if we're able to say that, then we can say that, yeah, I've got that kind of faith in a powerful God. But we will not serve your gods. I am not going to change my priorities. I worship the true and living God. I worship Jesus, and I'm not going to serve your gods. And I will not worship the image that you set up. I'm not going to buy into your way of living life, because we trust our God, period. That was as close as I could find to blowing your gasket. I typed in, blow your gasket, and this came up. That's King Nebuchadnezzar, in case you don't know who that is. So King Nebuchadnezzar just went bonkers. He says, I can't stand it when people, challenge me. And he said, take that thing, crank the thermostat up, 7 times hotter than it ought to be. And so they just raised the temperature to in that furnace to the point that it is dangerous, as if it wasn't before. And he says, get the strongest soldiers to tie up these guys. That was something I've talked about this, I've preached this section lots of times. I'd never noticed that the strongest soldiers were chosen. And get the best, strongest guys I got and take care of. You know, it's like, don't know why. Maybe he had a feeling that these guys are serving a powerful God. I'm not sure. But he has those soldiers get them. And it was so hot, that furnace was so hot, that those strong soldiers that hauled him over and tossed him into the furnace, they were killed by the heat that was coming out of that furnace. I can't imagine. You know, it says then, the king jumps up. It's like, okay, we're going to have roast Jews here. You know, I mean, throw these guys in this furnace that's 7 times hotter than it ought to be. And the king jumps up and says, whoa, didn't we throw 3 guys into the furnace? And they said, oh yeah, we did that, king. He says, I see 4 walking around in there. And it's not just that there's 4 corpses in there or 4 piles of ash, but there's 4 men walking around a fire that was so hot that it killed the soldiers that were outside of the furnace. He says, I see these guys walking around, and the 4th one looks like a son of the gods. There's something unhuman about that other person. He's divine. There's something godlike about that 4th person. A lot of debate has gone on. Who was that walking in the fire? I have a hunch it might have been an incarnation of Jesus, because he's the one that rescues us and has rescued us. But isn't that cool how in the Old Testament, way back before Jesus was born, there's this perfect picture of Jesus getting us through the hard times of our lives, getting us through the fire. The 4th one looks like a son of the God. And then he says to these guys, servants of the Most High God. This is out of the lips of a guy that just made a 90-foot gold statue and says, when I play music, you fall down and worship it. And then he calls out, servants of the Most High God, come out. Come here. What a beautiful picture that is that, whoa, look at this. Get out of that fire. Come on. I want to see what's going on. And then it says all these other people came and crowded around him and, you know, checked him out. They just were amazed at what they saw. But there was a change of attitude. And then he says, this is King Nebuchadnezzar that had just, you know, tried to kill these guys because they wouldn't bow down to his God. And he says, praise be to their God. And so all of a sudden, King has done a 180. And no longer is he saying, hit the ground when you hear the music and worship my God, but praise be to their God. Because he had asked, what God do you have that can rescue you from my hand? And he says, come on out of there. Praise be to their God. He sent an angel to rescue his servants. Now, if we can believe Nebuchadnezzar, and I wouldn't put too much theology basis on him, but he says that that was an angel that was in there. Whatever it was human. And it was something that was able to send a message to Nebuchadnezzar. And they trusted in their God. They trusted him. And they said, we're going to believe God. We're going to trust in him. And he will deliver us from your hand. But even if he doesn't, we're not going to bow down. And so then he says, they trusted in him. And they refused to worship anyone other than their God. They wouldn't worship my God, that big fancy gold thing standing out there. They wouldn't do it. But anyone who speaks against their God, now it isn't just a matter of worshiping their God. If you even say anything bad about their God, then I'm going to cut you to pieces. Wouldn't it be nice to have a ruler like that? Oh, man. You know, that was his answer. I'll cut you to pieces and your homes are going to be destroyed. You know, I'm going to just wipe out anybody that goes against and says anything against these gods. No other God can save in this way. That you can quote from Nebuchadnezzar, because he nailed it. No other God can save in this way. And I talked earlier that I will be preaching later about hell, and hell is defined as a place where there is fire and gnashing of teeth and darkness and pain and suffering, and no other God can save us from that fire except this God, except the God that we serve. No other God can save in this way. Then, what can I take away from this story that is one of my favorites? Number one, whatever problem you're going through right now, the God we serve is able to deliver us. He can get us out. He can deliver us from the fire and the trials that we're going through right now. God will deliver us from the world's problems. It may not be in the way we want it. And we prayed this morning for Howard, and we'll continue to do that. God may choose to heal Howard forever, and he won't have any more pain physically. He will be in the presence of the Lord, and that is the ultimate healing that we could ever pray for anyone. And God will deliver us from this world's problems. It might be taking away the disease, it might be removing us from the world. But one way or the other, God will deliver us from this world's problem. But even if He doesn't remove me from the flames, I'm going to stay true to God. Even though I may have a sentence of death by the disease that I've been diagnosed with, I'm going to hang on because I'm going to stay true to my God. Because He's able to get me through, and He will. He'll get me through one way or the other. And we need to know that God joins us in our fiery trials. He didn't just have us be Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Pick your names, I don't care. He did not leave those three men in the fire by themselves. He got right in there with them. I want to encourage you this morning. The fire that you're going through, the fiery trial, God is right there with us. He's with you this morning. And He will join us. And God still does work miracles. He did back then. He let me burn a handkerchief this morning and not burn down the church. God does miracles. Some are more significant than others. But God is still a God who works miracles. And I love these verses. If you don't have them highlighted in your Bibles, please do. Daniel 3, 17 and 18. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and He will deliver us out of evil, O king. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Make that commitment to follow God. I'm going to ask that you stand with me as we conclude. Pray. Father, I thank you for the trials in our lives, the fiery furnaces that sometimes we find ourselves in. They're never enjoyable. They're always painful, and we want our way out. And that's what we're asking for. We know you can get us out. But even if you don't, we're going to stay true to you. Only with your help. Ask that you would be with each one of us, that we can have that kind of faithfulness and commitment to you. And we thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.